both of them wrapped in the heavy silence of the hospital waiting room. He didn't feel the need to speak. Neither of them did. The only sounds in the room were the soft beeping of medical monitors and the occasional shuffle of footsteps down the hallway. The events of the night had drained them both, emotionally and physically. Ethan, with his usual drive to fix everything through action, now found himself unable to do anything but be present. Lily had been sitting there for hours, her worry etched into her every movement. But Ethan could see the exhaustion in her. She wasn't just physically tired. The weight of the uncertainty, the fear for Anna, was heavy on her heart. He had witnessed her strength, her endless patience, her capacity to give when it seemed like she had nothing left to offer. And in that moment, he realized how much he was learning from her. There was no grand gesture of compassion on his part, no quick fix, no solution to the crisis unfolding in the room behind them. Instead, he just stayed. Beside her, he didn't push for words. He didn't expect her to speak about the things they both feared. He understood, without being told, that sometimes, silence was the greatest gift they could offer each other. The minutes stretched into hours, the weight of the night making everything feel like it was happening in slow motion. Eventually, Ethan rose, feeling the soreness in his legs from sitting too long. He disappeared briefly down the hall, reappearing with 2 paper cups of water. Wordlessly, he handed one to her. She took it, nodding in thanks. But she didn't look at him directly. Her shoulders were tense, and in that quiet space, Ethan instinctively reached for his coat, draping it gently over her shoulders. She blinked at the gesture, her lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. She didn't refuse, though. The soft touch of the coat around her shoulders was the most tender thing she had experienced in hours. Her head drifted to one side, her eyelids becoming heavier by the second. Slowly, the exhaustion of the long night caught up to her. She fell asleep curled up on the bench, her knees drawn tightly to her chest. Ethan didn't move. He didn't want to. He couldn't. He remained upright, his eyes fixed on the door to Anna's room, as if he were a soldier on night watch, guarding something precious, something irreplaceable. And when dawn eventually crept through the small window of the waiting room, pale and cold, Ethan was still there. He hadn't slept. He didn't need to. His eyes, heavy with fatigue, never left the door. But there was something in his expression, something almost paternal, as his hand rested gently on the edge of Anna's bed. His fingers, carefully intertwined with the tiny ones of the little girl who had captured his heart, spoke volumes of the quiet bond that had begun to form between him and this family. When Lily stirred, waking up from her fitful slumber, she saw him there, just a few feet away. She blinked, adjusting to the dim light of early morning. Her gaze shifted to Anna, and then back to Ethan. He hadn't slept a wink, but there was no blankness in his stare. Instead, there was something else, something deeper, and for the first time, Lily realized it wasn't just Anna who had made him stay. Ethan was different now. "You stayed all night," she said quietly, her voice still heavy with sleep. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Ethan turned to her, his voice low but steady, almost as if he had been practicing the words in his mind for hours. "She kept squeezing my hand every time I tried to let go," he explained simply. There was no drama in his words, no show of emotion. It was just truth. He couldn't leave, not until he knew she was safe. Lily looked at him, and for the first time, the edge that had always been in her gaze softened. She felt something new, something fragile but real, a sense of gratitude that went deeper than she expected. And something else, too. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. The words heavy in the air. Ethan shook his head, his eyes lowering to the floor. "I know, but I'm not like you, Lily," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I don't know how to be this selfless, this good." Her frown deepened, but she didn't speak at first. She let him finish. "I've spent most of my life solving problems with money, or contracts, or leverage. But last night, none of that mattered. I couldn't buy my way through it. I couldn't control anything, but I could be here. And I wanted to be," he said. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Her heart slowed, each beat feeling heavier than the last. Ethan's words, simple as they were, cut through the noise of her own insecurities, her doubts about him, her fears of getting hurt. But what he said, what he was willing to admit, changed everything. "I don't know what kind of man I'm becoming," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "But I know I don't want to become it without you." Lily's throat tightened at the rawness of his admission. She didn't need a grand declaration of love, not like this. There were no romantic words or desperate pleas for her to stay. He wasn't asking for her to fix him or save him. He was simply there, present, willing to stay even when the world seemed to be falling apart. In that moment, neither of them moved. There were no words, no promises, no gestures. Just the unspoken truth that they were both changed, both willing to trust again, in a way they hadn't allowed themselves before. For the first time, Ethan didn't need to prove anything. And Lily, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel alone. Anna shifted in her sleep behind the glass, and Ethan's eyes turned toward the door again. His hand still rested gently on the edge of her bed, holding onto the small child who had brought them both together. Lily looked at him, not as a wealthy businessman, not as someone with a past full of mistakes, but as the man who had chosen to be there when it mattered most. Without speaking, she reached for his other hand and held it, and in that silent gesture, something new passed between them, something fragile, something unbreakable. A few days later, at a community center, once an abandoned warehouse now transformed into a bright space full of life, Ethan stood at a podium. The room was filled with curious reporters, local leaders, and community members. A banner stretched across the front, proclaiming a vision for every child. Ethan, dressed simply in a dark blazer and no tie, stood calm and composed. But there was something different in his demeanor. He no longer held himself with the same air of authority that he once did. There was a quiet pride in his posture now, a strength born not from his wealth or power, but from something else entirely. Lily stood beside him in a navy dress, her hair pulled back loosely. She hadn't wanted to attend at first, but Ethan had asked her, not as a symbol or a token of his success, but as his partner. When the room settled, Ethan spoke, his voice carrying effortlessly, but with a new softness to it. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, glancing briefly at Lily. "This isn't about my company or my investments. This isn't about headlines. It's about something that started small, something that has grown because of the people who cared enough to make it happen. It's about the small things, the ones that matter." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at Lily. "I've spent most of my life building things, but lately, I've realized the most important things don't get built with contracts or money. They get built with care." The room was silent, and then, he turned slightly, extending his hand toward Lily. "It's about listening, about showing up, and it's about learning from people who show up every single day," he said. The room went still. And then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, Lily stepped forward. Ethan's voice, proud and unwavering, filled the space. "This is Lily Harper," he said. "She's a teacher, a community leader, and the reason I remembered what it means to care beyond convenience." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a wave of applause filled the room. But it wasn't just applause for the partnership, or the announcement. It was for the realness of the moment, the authenticity of it. And then, a familiar voice rose from the back. Grace Ward, Ethan's mother, fragile yet unwavering, stepped forward. She spoke with a warmth and tenderness that sent a ripple through the room. "I'm Ethan's mother," she said, her voice filled with pride. "And I've never been prouder of my son than I am today. Not because of his success, but because he found the kind of woman I've always hoped he'd meet." Lily stood there, overwhelmed by the moment. Tears welled in her eyes. Ethan leaned in close to her, his voice low and tender, only for her ears. "I thought that blind date would be the last one of..." Ethan Ward, the reserved and cold-hearted CEO, had lived a life dominated by control, power, and indifference. When his mother, Grace, asked him to attend one last blind date with a young woman named Lily Harper, he reluctantly agreed, thinking it would be a mere obligation to bring her peace. The evening took place in a luxurious French restaurant where Ethan, accustomed to the rigidity of his world, sat with a stiff posture, his gaze fixed on the door. When Lily arrived, the contrast between them was immediate. Shy, was unassuming. No makeup, dressed simply, and carried herself with a natural ease, unlike anyone he'd ever met. The two began talking, and Lily's honesty was a breath of fresh air, starkly different from the performances Ethan was used to. She openly admitted she wasn't interested in impressing him, and that she was only there because his mother had asked her to. As they spoke, Ethan found himself intrigued, not by her looks or her charm, but by her raw authenticity. She had no grand ambitions, no desire for wealth or status, just a passion for teaching children and making sure they were seen, heard, and cared for. As the evening progressed, Lily revealed more about her work as a teacher, the hardships she faced in a classroom filled with children from troubled backgrounds, and how she devoted her life to them, not for praise, but because it was the right thing to do. Her perspective was a stark contrast to Ethan's, whose world revolved around leverage, outcomes, and the ruthless pursuit of success. Despite his initial skepticism, something about Lily's unpretentious nature unsettled him, and by the end of the evening, he realized that for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. After the dinner, a small act of kindness further deepened his curiosity. Lily, noticing a homeless man outside, quietly gave him her leftover food without any words, just a brief touch on his shoulder. Ethan watched this simple, unassuming act and felt something shift within him. It was a moment of vulnerability, a crack in his carefully constructed walls. Over the next days, as their lives crossed paths again, Ethan found himself thinking about Lily in a way he hadn't expected. She was different, and despite his usual dismissiveness towards such relationships, he felt a pull towards her. His respect for her grew as he learned more about her background, her decision to leave a prestigious career in finance to become a teacher and foster parent, her broken engagement with a manipulative venture capitalist, and he admired her strength and resolve. He tried to help, albeit in his usual manner, by anonymously funding a grant for her classroom, only to have Lily reject it. She didn't need money to make a difference. She needed genuine support. Her words stung, but they also made him question his understanding of giving and what it truly meant to help someone. This rejection made him think more deeply about himself, his actions, and his own desires. Then, in a moment of personal crisis, when his mother's health took a severe downturn, Lily showed up at the hospital. She quietly sat by him, offering comfort without saying a word. It was a turning point for Ethan. His stoic exterior began to crack as he watched Lily comfort his dying mother with a lullaby. This small, tender moment spoke volumes to him about what it meant to truly be present. It was then that Ethan realized how much of his life had been spent building an empire based on outward success, while neglecting the deeper, more meaningful connections. He began to understand Lily's approach to life, her commitment to presence over performance, to giving without expectation, and to showing up when it mattered. But it wasn't just his mother's death that shifted him. When one of Lily's students, Anna, was injured in an accident, Ethan immediately rushed to her side, stepping into a role he never imagined himself in. He held Anna's hand through the trauma, something entirely foreign to him in his cutthroat world of business. When Lily arrived at the hospital, her gaze met his, and in that moment, without words, they both understood something had changed. The hard, unfeeling exterior Ethan had crafted over years of corporate warfare was starting to dissolve. He was no longer just the CEO, the decision-maker, the man with a plan. He was a man who had learned to be vulnerable, who had learned to show up, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. As they sat in the quiet hospital corridor, waiting for Anna's recovery, Ethan realized that the love he had so carefully avoided was the very thing that could save him from himself. It wasn't in the boardroom deals, the deals signed with just a signature, or the cold calculations of wealth. It was in the moments of tenderness, of showing up, of being real. He had found something he had been searching for his whole life, something Lily had quietly taught him how to be truly human. As Ethan sat there beside her, their hands brushed, and he felt a connection that went beyond words. He had never been more aware of how much he still had to learn, how much of his life had been spent building walls, and how much of that life he was ready to tear down. With Lily, he found the real world, the one that existed beyond the spreadsheets, beyond the empire he had built. A world where showing up, being present, and offering love was all that mattered. And as the hospital lights dimmed and the sounds of the city outside faded, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He would no longer be the man he had been. He would be someone else, someone who understood the importance of being there when it mattered most. As the days passed, Ethan found himself replaying his interactions with Lily over and over in his mind. It wasn't just her calm demeanor or her refusal to be impressed by him that intrigued him. It was something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. It was the simple, raw truth of how she lived her life, the quiet strength that ran through her veins. She didn't need to wear her accomplishments like a badge, nor did she have to prove anything to anyone. She just existed in a space of authenticity, of compassion, of presence. Ethan was used to people performing for him, whether it was in the boardroom, in the face of competition, or in social settings where status was the currency. But Lily didn't play by those rules. And that, more than anything, captivated him. His office felt distant to him now. His morning meetings, his endless calls with clients, the quarterly reports, the mergers and acquisitions, they all felt hollow. It was as though the walls around him had grown suffocating, and all he could think about was the quiet, unpretentious world Lily had shown him. It was a world that didn't value the accumulation of wealth or power, but something entirely different: connection, understanding, and kindness. It was something he had forgotten was possible, something that, when he thought about it, felt like a foreign language to him. Ethan knew he had to see her again. He knew she was living a life he could never have imagined for himself. She had made her choices, big, bold ones, and she had stuck with them. She had chosen to serve, to care for others in ways that Ethan had never understood before. He didn't have the answers, but he felt a burning desire to understand. Maybe, just maybe, she could teach him what it meant to truly live. One afternoon, he found himself on a walk through the city, something he hadn't done in years. The streets were crowded, the noise of the city filled the air, but his thoughts were quieter than ever. He wasn't thinking about the next big deal or the next move he needed to make. His thoughts were on Lily, the way she made him feel seen, the way she made him feel like maybe there was something beyond his fortress of success that was worth pursuing. Later that evening, he decided to visit the school where she taught. It wasn't planned, nor was it part of some grand gesture. It was just something he felt compelled to do. He didn't know exactly what he would find, but he knew he had to see her again. The school was small, nestled between two tall apartment buildings in East Harlem. It wasn't the kind of place where billion-dollar ventures would be launched or where boardrooms would discuss mergers. But there was something about it that pulled at him. As he approached the entrance, the sound of children's laughter spilled into the street. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of something real, something alive. In a way he hadn't experienced in his polished world. Inside, he found Lily in her classroom, surrounded by her students. She was down on her knees, talking to a small girl who was drawing with chalk on the floor. Her voice was soft, patient, but firm. There was a calm authority about her that commanded respect without a single word of command. She wasn't just a teacher, she was someone who had found a way to give a part of herself to others, without expecting anything in return. Ethan watched from the doorway, unnoticed by the children, and he felt a wave of admiration. But there was also something else. Guilt. He wasn't sure why, but it gnawed at him. He had never been able to give without expecting something back. That was how the world worked for him. It was a transaction, a deal, an exchange. But Lily was different. Her generosity was its own reward. After a moment, Lily looked up and saw him standing there. She didn't flinch, didn't look surprised, didn't even seem to register anything out of the ordinary. She simply nodded, offering a quiet, welcoming smile. It was as if she was inviting him into a world that had nothing to do with his wealth or his status. This was her world, and it wasn't for sale. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, standing up and brushing chalk dust off her hands. What brings you to this part of the world? The rain softly tapped against the tall windows of the upscale French restaurant nestled in Manhattan's heart, its melody mingling with the quiet hum of distant conversations. Inside, the golden glow of chandeliers illuminated the white linen tables, their polished crystal glassware reflecting the ambient light like diamonds. Ethan Ward sat alone at a corner table, his sharp navy suit a perfect match for the cool, composed demeanor that had earned him a reputation as the city's most distant, indifferent CEO. His posture was rigid, his watch a silent reminder of his schedule, a schedule that left little room for spontaneity or surprises. He didn't believe in blind dates, especially not the ones his mother arranged. Yet, this was different. Grace Ward, his mother, had asked him for a favor. She was sick, and time was slipping away from her. Her kidney failure was slow, inevitable, and she was no longer able to exert her usual charm. So, when she mentioned a young woman, Lily Harper, whom she had met at her volunteer clinic, Ethan reluctantly agreed. Not because he believed in love or destiny, but because he owed her this one small gesture of peace. 20 minutes. That was all he had promised himself. Then he'd politely excuse himself, making sure to keep his distance, his composure intact. The door opened sharply at 7:12 p.m. The unmistakable sound of a person shaking off an umbrella in the entryway signaling her arrival. Lily Harper, with her simple dark green dress, blonde hair pulled back in a messy twist, and a face that radiated sincerity rather than beauty, stepped inside. She had an air of quiet assurance, a stark contrast to the high-gloss world Ethan occupied. She met his gaze with calm, gray-blue eyes, offering him a warm but unassuming smile, a smile that spoke more of kindness than of any attempt to impress. Ethan stood, polite but distant, pulling out her chair without a word. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice soft and clear. "Ethan is fine," he replied, his words formal, his eyes still slightly distant. "Thank you for coming," he added, though part of him still struggled to believe in the premise of the evening. She sat, folding her hands neatly on her lap, exuding an ease he wasn't used to, and as the waiter placed menus before them and poured water, she broke the silence with an unexpected honesty. "I know this probably isn't your thing," she said, her voice light, and then added, "It's not mine either." Ethan glanced at her, eyebrow arched, unsure where this conversation was headed. "I feel like I know all about you from your mother," Lily continued, her tone free of judgment or pretense. "I know your coffee order, the way you organize your socks, things like that." Ethan blinked, mildly unsettled. "That sounds unsettling," he responded, though the corner of his mouth twitched, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of her attempt to break through his carefully constructed wall. She laughed, not nervously but lightly, as though she genuinely found the moment amusing. "I promise I'm not a stalker," she reassured him. "I teach elementary school and volunteer at the clinic a few nights a week. Your mother has mentioned you a lot." Ethan nodded slowly, the unease in his chest easing just a little. There was no performative agenda here. She wasn't trying to win his favor or impress him. It was refreshing, in an unexpected way. "I didn't come here to impress you," Lily continued, her tone frank. "I didn't dress up, I didn't Google your company, and I'm not here to try to sweep you off your feet." Ethan found himself watching her more intently now. There was no flirtation, no ambition, just a raw clarity he wasn't used to encountering. "I came because your mother asked me to," she said simply, "and I trust her judgment more than I trust dating apps or fate." Ethan didn't speak for a moment, taking her words in. Her honesty, her refusal to engage in the usual performances of dating, unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. It was like a jolt to his system, an invitation to let down his guard, even just a little. As she continued speaking, her hands folded on the table, Ethan's gaze drifted to the rain outside, its misty drizzle blurring the city lights, as though softening the harshness of the world around them. "So, Ethan," she asked, turning her attention to him now, "what exactly does a day in the life of a CEO look like?" Ethan's lips twitched, and he leaned back in his chair, half smiling. "Before or after I cancel meetings, fire someone, and read 30 emails about things I already said no to," he replied, a wry edge to his voice. She laughed, a genuine, warm sound. "I knew there'd be emails," she said, then glanced at him with a grin. "There are always emails." Her curiosity was real, and it caught him off guard. He had expected a perfunctory conversation, but she was asking questions that mattered. "And you?" he asked, intrigued. "Teaching 3rd grade? That can't be peaceful." She grinned. "It depends on your definition of peaceful. If peaceful means 28 kids arguing about whether Pluto is still a planet, then yes." Ethan chuckled under his breath, surprised by how easy it felt to laugh in her presence. "It's exhausting sometimes," she admitted, her expression softening, "but I love it. Kids are honest, raw even. They don't care about appearances or status. They just want to be safe and heard." There was an intensity in her voice, not of self-emotion but of passion for something deeply meaningful, for something real. Ethan leaned in slightly, his gaze fixed on her. "They trust you?" he asked. Lily's eyes softened, a little wistful. "They trust whoever shows up and stays," she said simply. He wasn't expecting that answer, and it sat with him in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was a weight to her words, a truth he hadn't expected to hear that night. "Some of my kids come to school hungry," she continued, her voice lowering a touch. "One of my boys eats half his lunch and saves the rest for his baby sister. Another girl sleeps through math because she's up all night caring for her mom." Ethan's fingers tapped once against his glass, but he said nothing. "What do you do when you can't fix any of that?" he asked after a beat. "I do what I can," she said simply. "I make sure they feel seen. I listen. I remind them they matter." There was no tremble in her voice, but there didn't need to be. Her words spoke louder than any emotion could convey. "And when that's not enough?" he asked. She smiled a little sadly. "Then I still show up the next day." The line lingered between them, settling into a quiet space that Ethan couldn't quite shake. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. Her world, so grounded in the basics being present, being enough, was a stark contrast to his own. A world of leverage, outcomes, and achievements. For a moment, he forgot about the time. For a moment, the CEO that he was, the one who commanded boardrooms and signed contracts, faded into the background. The waiter came to clear their plates, and Lily barely touched hers. As the server turned to leave, Lily called out gently, "Excuse me, could I have a to-go bag, please?" The bag arrived, and without a word, Lily stood and walked to the window, unlatching it just enough to slip the food outside. Ethan followed her gaze, and across the street, half hidden under scaffolding, he noticed a man huddled against the building, wrapped in a tattered coat. Lily moved toward him through the rain, offering the bag of food with quiet grace. She didn't linger, didn't say anything dramatic or grand. She simply gave without expectation or ceremony. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't name. The world he had built, one of privilege and status, suddenly seemed distant, irrelevant. As she returned to the table, he didn't speak, still trying to process what he had just witnessed. When the check arrived, Lily thanked him for the meal, for not leaving right away. He was about to respond when she was already out of the car and gone, leaving him alone with thoughts he wasn't sure how to organize. The next morning, Ethan found himself in East Harlem, clipboard in hand, surveying a potential site for a new development, yet his mind wandered to something else. Laughter rang out from behind a cracked fence. He turned his head to see Lily in the yard of a school, surrounded by children. His gaze landed on her with the same quiet recognition he had felt the night before. Without thinking, he walked into the yard, where small hands and sticky fingers surrounded him. He didn't know why he stayed or why he was drawn to her, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The children were laughing, pulling at his blazer, asking about his car and whether he knew Taylor Swift. Lily stood off to the side, watching him quietly. She didn't seem suspicious or aloof. She simply watched, curiously, as if witnessing a moment unfold. And when the bell rang, he realized just how long he had stayed, longer than he meant to, longer than he